guys, it's Miss Meyer with another episode of the Miss Meyer Show. Today we're going to talk about causes of the Civil War.
It's raining tacos from out of the
So, causes of the Civil War, and I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly because it's a lot of information. So we're going to go as quickly as possible without confusing you, okay? Because sometimes I tend to get off on tangents and things like that. Well, the Civil War, when people think about the Civil War, the biggest thing that they think about is, slavery, things like that. Sometimes you think about, when I was growing up, many years ago, I was all, when you said Civil War to me, first thing that popped into my mind was Gone with the Wind. And, but when I became a teacher and when I started to really to read and understand and to learn, there are many causes of the Civil War that have to do with things other than slavery. Okay, so, but the big issue is slavery and sectionalism. Now, the economies and culture of the North and the South were very different. And in the years before the Civil War, things were really huge. I mean, even today, you can go somewhere in the North and you can see a huge difference in just how people act and how life is and things like that. Move into Texas even though Texas is still pretty much considered the South, it's not as southern as New Orleans. And so when I came here and I was, drove, I'm not a very good driver as it is. Seriously, I'm probably the worst driver you'll ever meet. I'm much more laid back, and I'm like, well, all right, come on, get in front. And the people in Dallas are like driving really fast. So even today, you can see a huge difference in the North and the South. The North and the South before the Civil War were very different as well. The North had developed an economy based on industrial society. An economy means how they made their money. And they made their money based on industry, building things, factories, production plants, things like that. That's how they made their money. They utilized that with paid labor. So they had people, a lot of immigrants really, that would work in these factories and work in these industries, and they would do the job and make the money. They would do it for a wage. The South developed an economy based on agricultural labor, and that meant growing crops and things of that nature, indigo, tobacco, cotton, sugarcane, coffee, all these kinds of things. These were agricultural, and they based those agricultural economy on slave labor. So these people did not get a wage to work in the fields. They were property, basically, and that's the big issue of the Civil War. Cotton was a major crop that was grown in most of the southern states, and slave labor was used to pick and clean the cotton. And if you've ever seen a raw cotton, when you pick it, it grows. It's like a plant, really. And when you pick it, you've got little thorns and things like that. Slave labor was used to pick the cotton, physically pick it, put it into like a bag, and then they would clean it. They would take all the little thorns and anything else, they would take that off. In the late 1700s, a man named Eli Whitney, he invented the cotton gin. Now, this invention mechanically separated the cotton fibers from the cotton seeds faster and much more efficiently than people could. Now, this led to a drastic increase in cotton production. So as cotton could be processed much faster, there was an increased demand for slaves as more slaves were needed to pick the cotton. Because now, if they could do it quicker, they could get these cotton products, they could get the cotton and get the clean fibers picked very quickly, meaning they could get more of it faster, and they could sell it, making more money. Well, in order to do that, they would need to get the cotton off of the cotton plants or the cotton bushes, and they would need to be able to process it. They need to get it fast. So in order to do that, they would need more slave labor to do it, to pick the cotton, to bring it to them, because they didn't have a person out there to pick it. So Northerners and Southerners found it very difficult to agree on social, economic, and political issues, and that led to sectionalism. Sectionalism can be defined as a loyalty to one region or one section of a country rather than the nation as a whole. Okay? You go around my neighborhood here in Texas, you're going to find more Texas state flags than you do American flags. You're also going to find Texas Dallas Cowboys signs, things like that. That's sectionalism. There's a lot of Texas pride here in Texas, and it's really highly valued. We have sectionalism when it comes to schools. Think about that. I know that we are a virtual school, so it's a little different. But when I went to high school down in the parish in good old Chalmette, we had lots of sectionalism as it was with schools. I went to Archbishop Hannon, and so I was all about, I was a hawk, a Hannon hawk, and then there were people that were Chalmette Owls and the St. Bernard Eagles and the Andrew Jackson Colonels, and it was this, rivalry. That was sectionalism. It was pretty much what was going on between the North and the South at this time. People regarded themselves as Northerners or Southerners and not necessarily Americans as a whole. Okay? So, next we're going to talk about just some things that really pushed forward the whole Civil War. There were a bunch of factors, kind of like a divorce. Sadly, that's something a lot of us have gone through, with our families and things like that. Well, people just don't wake up one day and say, we're going to get a divorce. They don't. It is more often than not a bunch of things that leads to that separation. Well, the Civil War was a separation. The North separated from the South. And they didn't just wake up one day and say, all right, we're separating. We're going to separate. No. It was a bunch of little things that led to that decision. And we're going to talk about them. The first one is the Missouri Compromise. We've talked about this already, so we're going to go quickly through it. So in 1820, this compromise settled some of the debate over the spread of slavery. Southern states wanted slavery allowed in the new states. America was expanding. We now had a Louisiana Purchase. We had the Transcontinental Railroad. We had all these kinds of things. So we had lots of area to move into. So the southern states wanted the slavery allowed in the new states, while the northern states, they opposed the expansion of slavery. So under the Missouri Compromise, Missouri was admitted as a slave state, and Maine was admitted as a free state. Now what this did was keep the number of free states and slave states in the Union equal. That made it so that one group, slave states or free states, would not have the upper hand when it came to voting in Congress. Okay? The compromise also made slavery illegal in the Louisiana Territory, which is all that land that we got in Louisiana Purchase, not just the state of Louisiana as we know today. They made slavery illegal in the Louisiana Territory north of Missouri's southern border. So those were all things that happened in the Missouri Compromise. The Webster-Hayne debate happened in 1830, and this is when Senators Robert Hayne of South Carolina and Daniel Webster, the encyclopedia guy, I don't know if you guys even know what an encyclopedia is, of Massachusetts, debated whether or not states had the right to nullify a federal law. Nullify means get rid of, to make it null and void. You guys, I may have told you, I think I did, but I don't remember. I don't know, I think I did. But I've instituted a new rule in my house where there is only 1 hour of screen time a day, whether they choose that to be on their iPads or their television or their phones or the TV is up to them, Well, my children, they are the children of a history teacher, and so they say, we want to nullify this law. We do not agree. It is against our Constitution as your children that you're doing this to us. Okay, they want to get rid of it. I must say that, that's pretty cool that they remember the stuff that I teach then. But anyways, the Webster-Hayne debate argued that if the states had the right to nullify a bill that Congress had passed, Daniel Webster argued that only the Supreme Court had the right to decide whether or not a law was constitutional. When we developed the checks and balances and the whole branches of government, that was the whole thing. The Supreme Court's job was to interpret the law, to do those kinds of things. Well, this debate highlighted the issues of state rights, or the power struggle between the state governments and the central governments. And that's still something that we hear today. Last night was the Republican debate on CNN. I know all of you were watching it, right? Well, you heard a lot about states' rights versus government rights. And this is not something that is new. As you can see, it goes way back to like Thomas Jefferson writing the Declaration of Independence. And it was one of the big causes of the Civil War. States wanted, especially the southern states, they wanted rights. They wanted ability to, to decide things for themselves. And one of those things was slavery. Well, the other states were saying slavery is an immoral and a horrible thing. It does not count as one of these things that you have the right to decide. These are human beings. Well, it obviously, as you're going to say, it blossomed into something extreme. Well, not really even blossomed. It exploded into something major, and a whole civil war, separation of a country was the result. Now, the nullification crisis happened in 1828 and again in 1832. Now, what this was that Congress placed tariffs, and tariffs are taxes, on imported goods. That's goods coming into the country. Kind of like, okay, this iPad, okay? Pretty sure that it was made somewhere else, not in America. I don't know where it was made. Japan, China, probably one of I would assume. I'm not sure, I'm just saying. It is a good coming into this country and going to the Apple store actually I got this in New Orleans. So this would have been this would come into the Apple store to New Orleans. It would be a good imported. What Congress did in 1832 is they placed a tariff, meaning any good coming into the United States, the company that would be acquiring the good, or the company that would be sending the good, would have to pay a tax. Well, they did this in order to help American companies, and this is why. So let's just say there are two things. I gotta grab something that's close to me. Let me just show you. I have let's see. Oh! I have my makeup bag pretty close to me because, believe it or not, I did put on a little makeup to do this video. You'd be like, oh, where? I can't tell. All right, hold on. Here's I have some nail polish. All right, here we have some nail polish. Okay. So here we have two nail polishes, okay? So we have, one is Essie. Well, they're both Essie, I think. Essie's a pretty cool brand. My daughter, she wants me to always use this one because she says it doesn't chip as easily. I think all of them chip ridiculously. Oh, here we go. All right. Boys, I know y'all are like, I could care less about your nail polish, Ms. Meyer, but that's just the way it is. All right. So here we have OPI and we have Essie, two nail polish brands. Guys, these are important. These are really good nail polish brands. So let's say that the OPI is made here in it actually is. OPI is made here in the United States. Essie is made, what does it tell you? Let's see. Well, it says nail lacquer, so I don't know. Oh, this is made in the United States too. All right. But let's just pretend that Essie is made in Europe and this is made in the United States. Well, this is what Congress did. Okay? So if we have the Essie coming in, the tariff would mean that, let's say Target which I think I bought this at Target. The Target would want to sell Essie. So what they would do, because they would have to pay a tax to get the Essie into the United States, they would have to pay more. Well, they're going to want to get a return on their investment. So they would make the price of Essie higher in order to cover the cost of the tax that they had to pay to get it into the United States. Well, Target also sells OPI. Well, since OPI is made here in the United States, they wouldn't have to pay that tax to get it here because it's already made here. Therefore, in order to reap the returns that they wanted, they would not have to increase the price of OPI on the consumer, making it cheaper for you. So, if they're both pretty much the same, which one are you going to buy? You're going to buy the Essie, which is more expensive because Target needs to cover the cost of those taxes. Or are you going to buy OPI, which is cheaper because it was made here in the country anyway? So that's what the whole thing was. That's what the tariff, that's what Congress was doing. Okay? So at the time, most manufacturing in the United States took place in the northern states. That's how they made their money. Remember, the South was more agricultural. Well, southern states did not support the tariffs because they were forced to pay higher prices for goods and they saw the tariffs as a benefit only to the northern states, because the northern states, they were making products so they didn't have to import. And this is before they could just kind of ship from the north to the south. Okay, I'm not making much sense. Let me go back. Okay, the North and the South were pretty much like two separate countries. Okay, so the South, if they wanted machinery and factory and things like that, they got it from other places. They got it from overseas. They got it from Europe. They got it from Asia. They got it from other places. Well, the North, they didn't, because they made it themselves. Mainly what they got was food, agricultural things like that, because they already had the industry. The South did not have the industry. So in order to get these industrial products, they would have to ship them from overseas, or they would have to ship them from other places. So the South was having to pay these huge tariffs, where the North wasn't having to pay them because they already made it themselves. Wow. The state of South Carolina, for example, thought that the tariffs were unfair, and they refused to accept them. And they declared the tariffs to be null and void within the state. They said, we're not going to pay them. We refuse. It's not fair. This resulting crisis was called the nullification crisis, and it involved the debate of whether or not a state had the right to disobey a federal law. Basically, because it was a law and the state said, we're just not going to do it. I'm not doing it. So in 1832, South Carolina threatened to secede, threatened to move away, break away from the United States if the government tried to enforce the tariff of 1828 or of 1832. It happened 2 times, like I said. Andrew Jackson, who was the president at the time, he was outraged. He said there's no state had the right to deny a federal law, and he threatened to send troops to South Carolina to force them to comply with the law. Well, Vice President at the time, John C. Calhoun, he disagreed with Jackson, and he resigned. He said, you know what, Jackson, I am not going to be part of your administration if you're going to act like this. I'm going to quit. He quit, okay, totally quit. And he did that in protest of Jackson's threats against South Carolina. Well, Kentucky Senator Henry Clay, he became known as the Great Pacifier. A pacifier, you know what a baby sucks on? Well, not my baby. She refused to take one. But a pacifier is kind of like, and I'll show you what a pacifier is. I actually have one because we bought all these pacifiers for her. She refused all of them. Let me go grab it. So some of you who do have baby brothers or sisters or nieces or nephews or whatever, you may have seen these. This is a Wubbanub. It's a Wubbanub. It's so cute. It is the cutest thing ever. She likes it, but only as a toy. Like, she liked to hold him. She would never, use it for its intended purpose. So this is what a pacifier is. And when a baby's crying, a lot of times, parents will give the baby we call it a nippy, but they would give the baby the pacifier and then soothe the baby. Well, Henry Clay was the pacifier. You had all this stuff. You had Jackson, he's fighting with Calhoun. You got South Carolina fighting with the government. All this crazy stuff going on. Well, Henry Clay introduced a compromise that could temporarily solve the issue. Clay's solution was called the Compromise Tariff, and it proposed to reduce the tariff rates over several years. Basically said, okay, we are going to make it cheaper. We're not going to get rid of the tariffs, but we are going to not make them so expensive. And we will make it cheaper down, every year we're going to go down. South Carolina said, all right, sounds like a good idea. All right. So they withdrew their nullification bill and they did not secede from the Union. But it did show America and the southern states, that secession was a possibility, and that was something that they were willing to do if they didn't, pretty much get their way. Now, Dred Scott versus Sandford, and we've talked about Dred Scott before, but remember, we're talking about him again. Very quickly, Dred Scott was a slave who was taken by his owner to live in an area where slavery was prohibited, where there was no slavery. In 1846, Dred Scott sued for his freedom, and he claimed that since he lived in an area where slavery was not allowed, he should be free. Well, the Dred Scott versus Sandford case made it all the way to the Supreme Court in 1857. The court ruled that slaves were private property and not people or citizens, and they had no right to be protected by the Constitution or a right to sue. The courts ruled that Congress did not have the authority to prohibit slavery in territories, because that's where remember, we're getting bigger as a state, and if they didn't have enough people in an area, they were not called a state yet, they were called a territory. And they were saying that Congress had no right to prohibit slavery in territories, in areas that were not states. So, therefore, they said pretty much that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional, and it did not cover territories. The Compromise of 1850 dealt with the issue of slavery in the territory that the U.S. acquired as a result of the Mexican War. Now, Henry Clay proposed the idea. Henry Clay, remember? Your great pacifier. It's a wubba-nub. Isn't it cute? Can y'all believe that this is a $20 pacifier? $20! And when she wouldn't take it, I was devastated. I was like, oh, this is a waste of money. But we still have it, and she's going to be 3 in April, but she plays with it. She calls it Alphant. It's Alphant. She's so cute. All right. So the Compromise of 1850 had dealt with that land. So Henry Clay proposed the idea that California would be admitted as a free state, and the territories of New Mexico and Utah would decide the issue of slavery by popular sovereignty. Now, what popular sovereignty is, it's the practice of allowing the people to decide on an issue by voting on it. So that is, if I allowed popular sovereignty in my house of the whole 1 hour of screen time thing, I guarantee it would be nullified. They would get rid of it, because I have not only made this a law to my children, but I've also made it a law to my husband and myself. I mean, I own screen time, obviously. I teach online, and I do go to school online, but any kind of time spent that's not in school or at work, I just get 1 hour. And that doesn't include reading on the iPad, because I do read on my iPad a lot. So that doesn't include that. You can definitely continue to read on the iPad. That's totally fine. So, Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. So this was passed as part of the Compromise of 1850. The Fugitive Slave Act established a $1,000 fine to be placed on law enforcement officials who did not help in the arrest and return of escaped slaves. Lots of slaves would escape. Harriet Tubman, remember, she did the Underground Railroad, would help. 19 trips back and forth to help slaves escape into the Northern freedom. Well, if they found out that any law enforcement official aided in the escape of, slaves into freedom territory, they would be fined $1,000, and that's a lot of money. Even today, that's a lot of money. I remember one time my mom got a traffic ticket, speeding ticket, on Morrison Avenue in New Orleans East, and she was like, "Well, it can't be that much. It's not going to be that much." And I remember she called. She called the people and she was like, "How much is the speeding ticket?" And they told her how much it was, and she was like, "What?" She was screaming crazy. Let's see if she remembers it. Hold on, let me give her a call. Okay, so this law was passed because slaves. Let's call Mom, see if she remembers this. Hey, I'm recording you for my class, so don't curse. Mom, do you remember when you got that major speeding ticket in New Orleans East?
Yes.
Remember how mad you were and how you was screaming on the phone?
No, I wasn't screaming.
You were too! You were like...
No, I was screaming when that lady cut me off to get on the interstate. I wasn't screaming at the police officer gave me a speeding ticket.
No. You remember the big ticket you got that time in New Orleans East? And you had to call. And you had to call and get... You didn't know how...
Yeah.
You remember how mad you were?
I was mad.
She was mad.
Yeah, because I had that little kid and they said I was going 30 miles an hour. When I turned the corner, I was going 30 miles an hour.
And I remember you... Yeah, and you kept saying, like, how do you go 30 miles an hour as you're turning? I remember that. Do you remember?
Yeah, reckless operation of a motor vehicle. That's what he tried to get me. I'm like, I couldn't believe it, of course.
Anyway, so you never know. You never know with my mom. It's always a whole nother issue. So, yeah, she did. She got a huge ticket. So this law was passed because slaves were escaping to the north, and the northerners made no effort to capture and return escaped slaves to their owners. They just weren't. They were like, "No, I'm not sending you back." It's kind of like, I know what I could tell you. Hold on. Tigger. Everybody, we know Tigger. We love Tiggy. Well, Tigger was rescued. He was a rescue kitty. He really was. A teacher of mine, I don't know if I told you the story, but I'm going to tell you again. How about that? One day, the art teacher at the school that I was teaching at, she was crying. And, of course, being the compassionate individual that I am, I said, "What's wrong? Why are you crying, Susan?" And she said, "I found this kitten nursing on its mom at, and the mom was dead. It was on the side of the road. And I took it home as I couldn't leave it there. And, my dog hates him. He's gonna kill him, and I just don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna have to bring the little kitten to the pound, to the whatever SPCA we call it, the pound in Chalmette." And I said, "No, please don't do that." And I called up Mr. Meyer and I said, "Larry, we have a cat. Goodbye." And that's how we got Tigger. Well, I love Tigger, and I could never imagine sending this beautiful animal. He's a lion. No, actually, we say that he's a panther. Rawr. He's like Bagheera on the Jungle Book. Look at him. Look at this. He's a jaguar. Rawr. He purrs so loud. But anyways, that would be like me saying, "Oh, I'm going to send him back. I'm going to send him back where he was, could be killed and run over by a car or eaten by a coyote or whatever." The Northerners said, "No, these are people. We're not going to send them back. We're not going to send them back to be tortured and possibly murdered and beaten and abused. No way." So they put in this Fugitive Slave Act. Well, Uncle Tom's Cabin was a book, and it was written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. It was published in 1852, and this novel describes the realities of slave life in harsh detail. Tells you what's going on. It caused many people to emphasize with the slaves and to join the anti-slavery movement. Remember, I told you, books are knowledge. Reading is knowledge. The way that I became a vegan was that, I originally my eyes were opened to the whole factory farming thing by reading a book called The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And the way that I became a vegan was by reading a book called The China Experiment. And that was, it's on my iPad. Who wrote it? The China Study And Dr. Colin Campbell was the name of the guy that read it. It changed my life. Books can have that ability. Books can change your life. So read a book. Remember that show Reading Rainbow with Geordie LaForge from Star Trek? I don't know if y'all remember it. It's like, take a look, it's in a book, Reading Rainbow. I can do anything. Ways to go, ways to grow, Reading Rainbow. Look how you... Baby, sing it. All right, you can go play. Go on, go play. Shedding hair all over me. All right. Beast has, he doesn't care when I sing like that because he's deaf and can't hear me because he's so old. He just lays right here and, farts constantly. It's got really bad gas no matter what food we give him. I did buy Beast. I know this is getting off topic, but whatever. I did buy Beast. I bought him this pet bed, y'all. It's like really expensive pet bed, which I don't like to spend lots of crazy money. I just don't, I'm pretty good with my money. But it's like for old dogs with joints and, helps them stand up if they have any, it's hard for Beast to walk and things. So this is supposed to help him. Guess who won't let him lay on it? Tigger. It's now his bed, and he won't even let Beast go near it. And poor Beast is stuck laying on the floor. Right here, where he always lays. Poor bed. All right, so the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So under the terms of the Missouri Compromise, slavery was not allowed in the areas that were part of the Louisiana Territory. And that's not, like I said, the state of Louisiana as we think of it today. Louisiana Territory is all the land that we got with Louisiana Purchase. And it said that slavery is not allowed in the areas that are part of the Louisiana Territory north of Missouri's southern border. Well, in 1854, Senator Stephen Douglas, guy that, was one of the senators, of Illinois, he introduced a bill to create the territories of Kansas and Nebraska to let those territories decide on the issue of slavery by popular sovereignty. Remember, popular sovereignty is the people choose. This bill was favored by Southerners since the clause regarding popular sovereignty meant that the new territories would not necessarily come into the Union as free states. It would be up to the people to decide. Most Northerners did not agree with the bill for the exact same reason. So despite the opposition, Congress passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and this repealed part of the Missouri Compromise in the process, basically saying, okay, these states can come in and they can choose whether or not they're going to be free. Let them decide. Okay, Bleeding Kansas, and this is a direct result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So as a fly around here, it's driving me crazy. So soon after the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed, pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces went head-to-head in Kansas for control over the territory. You had people that were saying Kansas is going to be a free state, and then you had people saying no, Kansas is going to be a slave state. And this was this huge, like, that actually hurt. It hurt. But that's how it was. Like, they were kind of going against one another. So they were fighting for control over this territory, and the violence broke out, and blood was shed. People were killed. And so it became known as Bleeding Kansas. John Brown at this time also, like, all this is leading up to the Civil War. It's growing. It's getting momentum, and it's just like anger and just hostility. It's just big, it's about to go. So, in October 16th, 1859, and this is all happening around the same time, a well-known abolitionist, someone who fought against slavery, his name was John Brown, he led a raid at a federal arsenal, and that's where we have guns and things like that, in Harpers Ferry, Virginia. And his whole intent was to steal weapons from the arsenal and give them to slaves, and he hoped that in doing so, the slaves would then rise up and to start a rebellion in order to gain their freedom. Well, the raid failed, and John Brown was captured along with a bunch of other people that were with him, and he was executed. He was hanged. So following this event, many slave owners feared that there's going to be additional slave rebellions because things like this are continuing to happen. The election of 1860 was also a huge, big deal because this is when Lincoln comes into the picture. So in the presidential election of 1860, the issue of slavery divided the country, and it divided the Democratic Party. The Northern Democrats, they chose Stephen Douglas of Illinois as their candidates. The Southern Democrats were not pleased with Stephen Douglas's position on slavery, so they chose John C. Calhoun as their candidate. John C. Breckinridge as their candidate. The newly formed Constitutional Union Party did not take a stand on slavery, and they nominated John Bell of Tennessee. Well, along came this long, tall, lawyer from Illinois who was the Republican candidate, and he was Abraham Lincoln, and he had strong anti-slavery positions. Abraham Lincoln, he won all of his electoral votes from the free states, and John C. Breckinridge won all of his electoral votes from the slave states. So with 180 electoral votes, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. Now, in response to Lincoln's election, the southern states, starting with South Carolina, seceded from the Union. They said, well, if this guy's going to be our president, because Abraham Lincoln, he didn't, like you have some of these politicians today, especially, like I said last night, I was watching the Republican debate until I fell asleep. I was like, I'm going to bed, I'll have to watch this later. But last night, I'm watching this debate, and they'll ask questions, and some of these candidates are kind of like, well, they kind of like skirt around the issue. Abraham Lincoln was not skirting around the issue of slavery. He was saying it's wrong, it's immoral, and it is against everything. He wasn't mixing words. So when the southern states, they saw that this was going to be their new president, they said, well, we're going to go away. We're going to break away, and we're going to form our own country, and we're going to have our own president, and we don't care what you say, Lincoln, because we're no longer part of the United States. That's what happened. Well, secession happened, basically breaking away. So many people in the North argue that it was illegal for the southern states to secede. They said, hey, you can't leave. You can't just break away. Well, the people in the South said, oh, yes, we can. We broke away from Great Britain when we didn't agree with them, and now we are breaking away from you because we don't agree with you. Well, these people, lots of people in the North, believed that the Constitution did not allow a state to break away from the United States. But like I said, the southern states said, you're wrong. We broke away when England was not doing what we wanted, we didn't agree with, and now we're breaking away again. Well, this locked the southern states and the northern states in a civil war. The states that seceded, broke away, were Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. The Union states were Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, Missouri, California, Connecticut, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Ohio, Kansas, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Wisconsin. So the western counties of Virginia refused to break away from the Union, and that's why we have West Virginia. Really, that's exactly why we have West Virginia. So that was how it was broken down, pretty much. That's the way it was. Civil War was happening, and it was basically brother against brother, because especially in these border states, you had some people that agreed with, the southern states, and some people that agreed with the northern states. Abraham Lincoln went to Robert E. Lee and said, hey, I want you to be my general. I want you to do that. And Robert E. Lee said, I'm sorry, Mr. President, but I can't go against my home state of Virginia. I can't. And he went and fought for the Confederacy. So that's why they said it was brother against brother. My husband, one of his favorite TV shows is, you probably have never even seen it, but it's like a mini it's a mini series, like whatever. and it's called North and South, and it's like two guys that are best friends at West Point, and one of them lives in the North and one of them lives in the South, and the Civil War breaks out and they end up fighting against one another. It's I'm not gonna lie to you, it's not something that I would prefer, not my type of genre of entertainment, I guess you could say. It's kind of cheesy, but I mean, it does give you the idea of what's going on. It's got Patrick Swayze in it. I don't even think you guys even know who Patrick Swayze is, which makes me feel really old. Okay, so finishing out, so we're gonna just talk a little bit more about the different economies and about how money was getting made. So the South's economy relied heavily, like I said, on agriculture. Large amounts of money was invested in land and in slaves. Crops grew very well in the temperate climates in the fertile soils of the South. So the main crops that we had were cotton, tobacco, sugar, and rice. Now these required the work of many people in order to be harvested, especially on large plantations. My dad works for Domino Sugar down in the parish, because that's where I'm from, in Araby, right? If y'all have ever been there. And that is located on a huge sugar plantation. Slaves were a source of cheap labor for these plantation owners, and they were familiar with the farming, especially with the rice crops. The cost of a white man's labor for 10 years could buy an African slave's labor for life. Colonists in Jamestown, Virginia, first used slaves actually in 1619. Mostly went to work in the tobacco fields. The triangle trade route between Europe and Africa led to the increased number of slaves in the South. The triangle trade route, though, was deemed unconstitutional and stopped shortly after, during the time of the Civil War. There was no triangular trade. The value of slaves to southern plantations increased dramatically, like I said before, when Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. Because the cotton gin was capable of separating cotton fiber from the seeds faster and more efficiently than people could, that meant that more cotton could be processed each day. And in order to process the cotton each day, they would need more of it to get picked. And more of it getting picked would require more people. And I'm sorry I keep scratching my nose, but Tigger's cat hairs on my face. So slavery continued to be an important part of the Southern economy until the end of the Civil War. The Northern economy, farming was very difficult here. Cat hair on me. It's driving me crazy. So the climate made it really hard to farm. The soil also was very rocky. It lacked necessary minerals from growing crops. So instead, the North's economy relied on industry and manufactured goods. Financing, shipping, those were also ways that the North made money. Industry grew in the North in part because of protective tariffs, like we said before. Protecting things coming in from other countries. They made people want to buy American goods that were made in the North. So with the Tariff Act of 1816, there was a 25% duty, which is tax, on imported manufactured goods. Well, this made American goods more competitive with goods that were imported from countries such as Great Britain. Remember the nail polish. That's why people were wanting to buy this one over this one. While tariffs benefited the North, the Southerners were opposed to them because they were forced to pay the higher prices. So it's important to know that the industries in the North contributed to its success in the Civil War. It had advantages over the South because it was able to produce its own materials. They were able to produce their own weapons, their own artillery, their own armory, their own industry. They had their own railroads, where the South didn't have that. The South had lots of crops, but they didn't have the weapons. They didn't have the material. They didn't have the armory. They didn't have the physical things besides food that they needed. The South was not able to produce its own war materials. They had to rely on other countries, Great Britain, France, other places, in order to help us. And when I say us, I mean the South, because I live in Texas, but I'm from Louisiana. You're in Louisiana, so we are still part of we in this physical area of Texas and Louisiana, we're part of the southern states, the Confederacy. Excuse me. So cities like New York and Boston, they grew in the Northeast. They partly due to the fact that many immigrants settled there. It was a lot more population. The North was much more populated than the South. There were a large number of Irish immigrants that came to the United States throughout the 19th century. Irish immigrants were willing to work for low wages, and many of them found jobs building canals and streets, sewers, all over the Northeast. So during the 1840s, there was a rise in immigration, and therefore a rise in men who fought for the Union. You had a lot of them. They were coming over, they were fleeing from the Irish potato famine and coming into the New York area. When they came here, they started working. When they started working, Civil War broke out. The Union, they needed soldiers. Here comes this huge Irish population that fought for the Union. New York City, same thing. Huge increase in population after the American Revolution. We had a lot of people coming here because of its location right on the Hudson River and the Atlantic Ocean. It was an excellent location for a port, and we have a ton of people coming there. Same reason why New Orleans grew, because we were right there at the mouth of the Mississippi. So all of these cities, the northern states, had a bigger population. After the construction of the Erie Canal, New York boomed. It exploded into a trade center. Like, it started to get major. New York was not always, New York! You know how I love musicals and singing, even though I have the worst singing voice? Okay, it wasn't always like that. It was originally called New Amsterdam. And it wasn't this huge, big, booming city that it is today. But it started to come that way, especially after the Erie Canal. Henry Clay's American system was an economic plan that was designed to give new factories in the United States a chance to produce goods and help the United States to become economically independent after the War of 1812. Because that was what really showed us that, okay, other countries are going to come after us. Right now it's England, but it's not going to stop there. So it called for higher tariffs, making higher taxes on things coming into our country. It supported improvements for road building and railroads and a national banking system. It wanted to improve infrastructure, transportation, and trade between areas of the country to make us grow. And a lot of that growth happened in the North, not so much in the South. That caused a problem when the South broke away and said, okay, now we're our own country and we're not going to rely on you anymore, North. Well, in all actuality, we did need them. We needed them desperately. And we'll see that as the war went on. The Western economy. What's going on in the West? Okay? We got the North, we got the South. What's going on in all these other places? So while the economy in the West was largely agricultural, wasn't a ton of people. California, what? Hollywood, what? It was nothing. It was a desert. Okay? Various industries grew as natural resources were found in areas. Gold was discovered in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California in 1848. The gold rush, the 49ers. San Francisco, all about the 49ers. A beautiful place. I could totally live there. It's really vegan friendly too. Okay, I mean I'm just side note. Okay, but I don't want to leave the South. I love the South. I'm not going to leave. So I'm not going to go move to California. Although I would move to Washington D.C. I love that area. It's amazing. And when we go there, you're going to love it too. You're going to be like, oh, I want to go here. I think every single student that came with us last year, this summer, wants to go to Georgetown University in D.C. or near D.C. because it's that amazing. So whatever. I will leave the South to move to D.C. All right. So the gold rush people is going back, right? You're like, Ms. Meyer, you're so distracted all the time. I know. And I always say, I wonder where Kate gets it from. Okay, so now all these people in California, all these 49ers, the gold rush is a time when people are flocking to California. They're trying to strike it rich. They're flooding into California from all parts of the United States and from these other countries. So because of this surge in population, the California territory soon had enough people to say, hey, we're now a state. And it was admitted into the Union in 1850 as a free state who fought for the Union. Mineral deposits in other areas of the West contributed to settlements of states, Denver, Colorado, Helena, Montana. These were all mining cities that came into the Union as free states and fought for the Union. So the southern states, we were smaller, less populated, did not have the materials, did not have the infrastructure, we did not have the industry to fight the northern states or the Union states that had all of these things. And this all, you would think that they would say, okay, well, we're not going to be able to fight, this country. But when the South seceded from the North, it did not secede with the intention of going to war. They seceded and said, okay, we're separate. Leave us alone. Let us do our own thing. What happened was the northern states, President Lincoln said, you cannot do this. You cannot just break away. We are one country. We are unified. There was a big old thing at Fort Sumter, which we're going to talk about later. I even have little toys, like little soldiers that are going to fight. Vivian has been making them have little tea parties and stuff with Elsa, because we have little Elsa statues that are this big, and now I have little war figures that are this big, and so they have like they talk to one another. I'll have to show y'all what she does, but I do have those. It's going to be fun. It's going to be really fun. And a big war broke out. So it was never the intention to let's go to war. It was an intention to say, let us just be our own country. But just like the American Revolution, didn't happen like that. We'll talk about that next time on the Miss Meyer Show. See you next time. Bye.